you are watching this video, it means that of the two choices for your assessment tomorrow, you have decided to do the character of Sherlock Holmes question. Okay, so if that's not the one that you want to do, go back and click on the other link because this whole lesson is going to be about preparing you for this specific question. So, how do you start? What do we need to do so that you're super ready and really confident for tomorrow? I'm going to talk you through the two-stage process to coming up with your argument. I'm going to explain that, give you a couple of examples. I suggest you're taking notes during the video to help you recall these ideas a little bit later. Then you're going to answer some questions below that are just designed to get you thinking about the sorts of things that you might write in your essay. You do not and should not write about them all. It's about thinking about the options of things to talk about tomorrow and thinking, what do I feel most confident in writing about? What is most interesting? What do I have the most to say about? Because you do need to be completing a full response tomorrow. So with the argument and a small conclusion, you're probably going to do sort of 5 paragraphs total. So you need to have a decent amount to say. So how do you start? Where do you start? Well, I would suggest, as always, that you step back and you consider the full character. So when I think, okay, how would I answer this question? The first thing I do is think, well, what do I think of Sherlock Holmes? What are my impressions of his character? And the easiest way to do that is to just write a list of adjectives. So I write a little mind map and I think, okay, Sherlock Holmes, what do I think of when I think of his character? Well, I think of somebody who is inquisitive and curious. It's his job to seek the truth and go out there and find clues. I think of someone who's quite innovative and controversial, so doesn't act in an expected way, who's quite subversive, who does things differently, who does things in a kind of genius way, and who isn't afraid to upset people, isn't afraid to ruffle some feathers. So controversial, innovative, nice ways of saying that. And then I also think of someone who is brilliant, intellectual, insightful, someone who is unique, has a unique perspective, has an amazing ability to deduce, is set up as a kind of genius for me as a reader to admire. So I've got my list. That's, a little selection of quotations there. Sorry, a little selection of adjectives there that I think of when I think of Sherlock Holmes. I'm probably not going to use all of those in my essay. I'm going to choose the ones that I think are most interesting, and I'm going to sort of find evidence that supports those specific ones. So my next little question here on the left is, which of these are most interesting and which might link together? You could pick 3 that are very similar, and you could base your whole essay around sort of proving those 3. Or you could choose 3 very different adjectives and maybe show the different sides and nuances of Sherlock's character. There's no right way of doing it. It's just the way that you think is clearest and that you have the most to say about. So once you've got your adjectives and you're going to come up with your own in a task below, you need to step back again and you need to think about why Sherlock is presented in this way. So how is he presented? He's presented as inquisitive, curious, and controversial. Then, okay, why? And there are 2 things you need to think about. One is, how does he fit into his Victorian context, and the details about Victorian context that you learned about the last few weeks. And then 2 is, how does this link to what Doyle, the author, was doing? Because remember, Sherlock is just a construction. He is something that is created by Doyle to have a purpose, to symbolize something, to represent something, to mirror something. So I've got quite a few sort of prompt questions for you below. And again, you don't have to include all of this in your essay. You don't have to answer all of these questions. I have made them optional. The idea is that you're choosing the ones that you think are most interesting and you're gathering the notes for the aspects of context that you find most interesting. So, okay, a question you might ask yourself is Sherlock conventional? Is he subversive in terms of Victorian context? Now, pretty clear he's subversive. He's not a conventional gentleman, although he does show some gentlemanly characteristics and qualities. So you could actually say, well, to some extent he's conventional in terms of his appearance, but then he goes off and puts on a disguise of an opium drug addict. So he kind of subverts quite quickly. Do you think his behaviour and actions encourage a more critical or questioning perspective of Victorian ideas and values? So do you think the way that Sherlock is deliberate to make us question why so many people fit into these values? Quite possibly. So what could this actually look like when you put this together into an argument? Once you've got your adjectives and you've got your context and you've got your writer's intention, that's your argument. Your argument's only going to be about 3 sentences to start your essay, but it focuses on the things that you think are most interesting. So as an example here, I've chosen 2 adjectives and I've said Sherlock's inquisitive and insightful character allows Doyle, the writer, to mock and critique, it's my 2 writer's intentions verbs, the newly formed and developing police force in the Victorian period. The brilliant deductions of Sherlock starkly contrast with the bumbling, burgeoning Victorian police force. So that's an essay I could write where I'm talking about how impressive Sherlock is and how insightful and amazing he is at fighting crime. And then I could focus my essay on the fact that Doyle created this very impressive detective character to deliberately make fun of the detectives that were for the first time investigating crimes in the late Victorian period. So was he deliberately creating a character which was mocking and was totally impressive so that it casts a sort of negative light on the reality of the Victorian police force? I think you could write a whole essay on that because you'd spend a lot of time proving how insightful Sherlock was. You might spend some time making some contrast with the police character, like the inspector in the story, and you could constantly come back to this kind of mocking, critical view. That's one example. Now, have a go at the task below, have a go at filling in those. If you are really struggling to coming up with your argument, these are optional sentence starters. You do not have to use these, and sentence starters are really useful, but sometimes they can be quite restricting, and sometimes they can make your argument a little bit more sort of paint by numbers, a little bit more step by step, which is a really, really good essay, tends to be a little bit more fluid. But if you are struggling to construct it or start it off, it's absolutely fine to use these. So I've suggested if you are stuck, start with the what, and you could use this sentence starter. In The Man with a Twisted Lip, Doyle presents Sherlock Holmes as a character who is, and then adjective, adjective, adjective. So your first sentence is literally just that with your 3 chosen adjectives, and you can borrow mine if you really want to. During the text, a reader might feel or think that, and then you can just say sort of what's our overall impression of Sherlock? How do we view him? What do we think about him? And then you have to make sure you've got the why in there as well. So link him to his context. Interestingly, he mirrors his Victorian context as, or interestingly, he subverts his Victorian context as, or you could say, interestingly, he both mirrors and subverts. And then I suggest that your final sentence would be Doyle seems to be using Sherlock's character to question, mock, critique, etc. So that could really be sort of 3 or 4 sentences. What's he like? Adjectives. How do we feel about him? How does he link to his context? How does he link to the intentions of the writer?